Amazing, good stuff.
Hi everyone, welcome to Peabody's Online Jobs and Apprenticeship Fair. We are just going to wait a minute or so for people's web internets to load up and stuff, and then we'll get going. So the number count is going up, which is what we like to see. As I said, we'll start shortly. Okay, hi everybody, welcome to the Peabody Online Jobs and Apprenticeship Fair. My name's Nikki and I work for Peabody. Today we're joined by Emily Cook from Generation, who's going to be delivering today's session. This event is being recorded and will be made available on our Peabody YouTube channel. You can find that by searching Peabody London in YouTube. We'll also be sharing Emily's slides, so there's no need to scribble everything down. You can just listen to her and ask some questions at the end, and then you can revisit them at a later stage. As I said, we'll be hearing from Emily and then having a Q&A session. So if you do have any questions you want to ask, please pop them in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screens, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. There's also a chat function available for you to leave any comments should you wish to. Before we start, I'd just like to say a big welcome to you all and a very special welcome to any Peabody residents who we may have joining us this afternoon. I'd like to remind you that we have a one-to-one careers service that's completely free to access for all of our residents. There's lots of information on our website. You can get help with things like CV writing, how to search for jobs better, and even preparing for an interview and things like that. So please do get in touch with the team if you can. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hide myself away and hand you all over, sorry, to Emily. We can't hear you, Emily.
Oh, sorry, it's that damned mute again. So I'm Emily and I work for Generation, who are a charity that support people into work, much like yourselves. So for anyone looking for a job, I am one of the career coaches there, and it is my job just to try and support people through understanding what is employability, what is the process from going from not working all the way through to getting a job and really thriving. And today I'm going to be talking about how to interview like a pro. So as many interview skills as I can possibly cram in to the next 30 or so minutes. I'm going to go quite fast, but as we said, the slides will be available at the end. And hopefully, if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to be on hand and answer any of them for anybody, not just in the Q&A at the end of the session, but afterwards as well. So to start off, there are 5 things I think you need to be really successful at interviews. So the first step we're going to talk about is preparation. Then it's about logistics, making sure you've got a little bit of planning done for some likely questions, thinking about the kind of questions you might be asked, what type they might be, how to handle difficult questions, how to really sell yourself and what you've done, even if it's not very aligned, and then finally interviewing them. So let's get started. And if there are any questions along the way, we'll deal with them at the end if that's okay. And hopefully I might answer them as I go through. So first up, it's just really useful. The first step is to actually know what you're going for. So if you've got an interview, congratulations, well done. And it's really important. Some of the next steps are understanding what that interview is going to look like. So in your prep, you want to know the format. Is it online? Is it in person? Is it some questions? Is it a get to know you? Will there be tasks? Anything like that. So if you're not sure, email or speak to the organization and find out. And that really helps you know what to expect and helps you plan. Also, we want to know the role. So give it a quick double check of the job description to make sure that it's right. It's not uncommon for people to decide at this point they've got an interview and then realize it's not quite when they read it again what they thought it was. So have a look, get to know the organization, especially. So you want to get on Google, research everything you can about them, look at them on LinkedIn, what are they sharing, what are the latest news topics, and then you can really grow your understanding. And that will help you ask questions later down the line. And you also, in that, you want to know what they're doing. So how are they expanding? Are they growing? Are they going abroad? What are the big topics that they're dealing with? You also want to know your own CV and career history. So make sure beforehand you've got a bit of prep and you've made sure that you're really tight on all the timelines and you're not going to say anything that sounds different to your CV because that's not going to come across very well. And you want to have your interview questions ready. Ready and prepped. So as you're doing your prep, some questions will pop up. We're going to write them down, and then they're going to be taken into the interview as a bit of fuel to ask at the end. And then also one of the key things is know exactly why you'd like to work there. If you're not sure about that, you need to practice that, because that needs to be a really nice spiel where you can really confidently say why you want that job. So you've got your preparation. Now, one of the key parts of preparation, I'm actually going to kind of model this for you right now, is thoroughly understanding the job description and analyzing it. Okay. So I've just taken a random job description online. And when you're like thinking about interview, this is the kind of thing you want to do. So you want to be going through and you want to be making notes on the kind of location. So for example, this one is working at home. Are they going to provide a laptop? That might be a question that I write down in my post-interview session. Other questions I've got, it says there's permanent and part-time. So do I need to be really sure about which one I've been applied for and which one, and am I going for the right role? When I'm looking at the opportunity, they say they can bring their whole selves to work. I love that phrase. That jumps out to me. So I want to make sure I use that phrase to say, yes, I really want to bring my whole self to work. There's great alignment here. So you're going to work through the job description, as I have done here, and you're just going to make notes on what it is you love about it, what are the values they mention, and all the different bits along the way. And that kind of analysis is going to draw some of the things that you want to mention in your interview. So for example, I've put that they're core values. I'm going to need to mention those. That's important. I'm going to need to be passionate about providing customer service. That's probably a phrase that I want to mirror back at them. So I'm going to write that down and make sure I use it. And then when I look at the responsibilities and the required skills, I'm going to focus on these and think about interactions with customers. And here's where I'm going to start to think, right, here is where I might need to have examples in the future. So right at this prep stage, we're thinking about when I'm asked questions, I'm probably going to be asked a question about what it's like to interact with customers or tell me about a time. So I'm going to make some notes. And in the side here, I've thought about what have I done before? So I used to work in Subway. So I've written down here, oh, my Subway job will be a useful example, because I used to serve people sandwiches late at night and they used to be really drunk. And sometimes that was a bit of a challenge for me. So that's one of the roles. Also, policies and procedures. So what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm thinking about, these are the questions I'm likely to be asked about. I'm making notes and I'm noting down which job I think would be a great example to talk about when I'm giving my answer. I'm going to keep going through all the way through. And then hopefully I've got a really good idea about what things I've done previously. Worth mentioning here, when you're doing this, it doesn't have to be, if you're talking about reactive customers and de-escalating angry people, you can also use examples from family, or you know, if you've been caring or you've got childcare responsibilities, it's okay to use examples that aren't always work. They can be from voluntary work, education, and real life too. It's about the quality of the example, not necessarily that you were paid while you were doing it. So don't panic if you don't have a huge amount of work experience either. And then once you've gone through, you're going to write down some things that you might have done along the way. And we're going to start to get towards a place where we've got a good idea of the things we might be asked about, because they've popped up. And then we're going to create a bit of a table. So this is just an example. You might want to create something similar. So they said in the job description, you'll need to be providing feedback on bottlenecks. And then I've given an example of where I might do that. So I'm thinking of what questions I might be asked, and I'm prepping for the kind of example I might give afterwards. And this can be really helpful. Just go back. This will just stop you having a bit of a kind of mind blank when you come to be asked a question. So if you can, create a little grid, think about the kind of questions or the things they're saying you'll need to do in the job description, and then give an example from your previous life where you can give an example of that. It looks really good. And also it just means that you've got as much preparation as possible to stop the stress and the uncertainty of a job interview and all the questions that you're not sure that they might ask. So the next step, so once you've done your prep, you've got loads of ideas for what's going to happen. You need to think about logistics. So you're going to think about your clothing. Is it appropriate? So for example, the top I'm wearing right now, I might just want to make sure like this, lift it up a little bit to make sure it's really clear. I'm not exposing too much skin, that it looks appropriate for the shot that I'm in. It looks okay. Also, you want to, if you can, if you're sent the interviewer names, just maybe note them down in advance. It looks really good. Make sure you've got your time and your travel sorted. So if you're traveling physically to an interview, make sure you're allowing plenty of time. And that means if you miss the bus, the next bus should still get you there with plenty of time to spare. Better to sit in a coffee shop around the corner than it is to be late to an interview. Get your CV and your job description together and print it out so you've got a copy. It's always nice to hand one to the employer if they want one. Take a notepad and pen. That's my secret weapon. some water, which I've got here now for the session as well. And the notepad and pen, you can also put all of your notes, questions, anything in. If you take prep in with you as an interviewer, there's no problem. If someone's come in with loads of things that they want to say and they've already made notes, that's great. It just shows they're brilliant at planning. And then your list of questions for jobs, for things that you want to ask them at the end as well. Another thing on logistics, if you are having a virtual interview, so this kind of thing over Zoom is becoming really common now, there's a few things to bear in mind. So bear in mind your background. Is it appropriate? So here I've used the Peabody background, but behind me is actually a really blank wall. Doesn't say too much about me, but there's no one running around in the background. So that's okay too. Just think about what that looks like. Try and make sure it's roughly, tidy and presentable. If you've got family in the house, ask them not to walk behind the screen at all. If you've got any pets, maybe lock them in a different room. So I've got a dog. He's currently sat in my kitchen. So hopefully if he barks, you can't hear him. Make sure you've got your notes and any prep with you in front of you, or you can even put it behind your laptop screen. There's nothing wrong with having a few notes just in case you draw a bit of a blank. Clothing wise, again, just make sure. So for example, now I want to make sure that I don't just blend into the background. So I think my clothing's okay. I'm trying to minimize distractions for the interviewer. So they're focused on what I'm saying, not random things happening in the background, like my arm half disappearing, which it is now. Okay. Things like that. So just really be mindful when you're on an online interview. Try and make sure your internet connection is as good as possible. Ask other people to not use the internet during that time. Make sure it's all sorted. Get your laptop or your device charged and ready to go so you don't have to scrabble around for a charger halfway. And then think about lighting. So today I've actually got a lamp just in front. If I turn it off, it's not so great. So just think about trying to sit in front of some natural lighting so you're lit up and it doesn't look too dark behind you. It all presents you in a really nice way. So things to think about there. What you don't want to happen is what happens in this video, if I can show you very quickly, is a very unfortunate incident where somebody is having a job interview. And as you can see here, their partner wanders through the back of the screen. So what we really want to do is to avoid unnecessary distraction and something happening in the background. So hopefully we learn from that example and try and make sure where possible, we minimize the likelihood of something happening that makes the interview feel really difficult. And if it's difficult like that, it's hard to recover from just when you're kind of getting into your groove. So best to try and minimize all the disruption. So the next step we're thinking about after we thought about our logistics and prep, we're thinking about the kind of questions that we're going to get asked. So we've already gone through and thought about the kind of topics that we might talk about, but there are also different types of questions. And so I thought this is really important to cover. So there's a kind of question called competency-based interview questions, and they're a way for employers to predict your future performance. We're not assessing what you already do, it's your ability to be able to do something in the future. And they're behavioral questions, and they normally ask you to tell about a time or describe a situation that talks about a certain value, role, or capability. And that's a competency-based interview question. That sometimes sounds like, tell me about a time when you went above and beyond, or tell me about a time when you ensured great customer service. So it's a very open question, and there's lots of room in there for your answers. There are also other questions, other competencies that you might be asked about, so communication, teamwork, integrity, leadership, anything like that. So often they will be found within the job description, which is why that analysis we did at the start was so important. There are real benefits to this kind of question. They focus on, you probably can find within the values exactly what you're going to be asked about, because those competencies are usually kind of very well advertised. That's really nice. And also it gives you plenty of scope for giving great answers. They're not set to kind of test you or trick you. They're very much an open forum for you to really bring your skills and showcase what you can do. And they also mean that you're being assessed against exactly the same criteria as everybody else. Tell me about a time when you did X, Y, or Z. Now, there are other kind of questions as well. We've got the kind of tell me about yourself question. So often they'll start with a bit of a warm-up question around who you are. And this is very important. You're not just going to launch into a 5-minute discussion about your whole life, but instead you're really going to think about, okay, what is relevant to who I am and what I do to the role? And how am I going to talk about that as a story? So for example, I worked in Subway before, as I mentioned. Is that relevant to the job I do now? Well, Talking with people and liaising with customers is probably a good skill. So when I'm talking about my job history, I might just roughly touch and say, when I worked at Subway, I really learned how to speak with customers and to kind of deal with difficult customers. Then I moved into a role doing something else and I brought this skill that's relevant to the job that we're talking about. And so I'm using relevant previous history, but I'm only drawing upon the skills I think I really want to emphasize. This isn't, as it seems, just tell us anything about yourself, but it's almost tell us about the skills that you've gotten to that we think would be good for this role and how did you get them. Your answer should aim to be kind of roughly 5 minutes or so on this kind of question. Also, there's questions on strengths and weaknesses. They can always be a bit challenging. And I can give some advice on this one around just making sure you kind of talk about them in the same way. When we talk about weaknesses, it's okay to say that we're not great at stuff. So don't get worried that you're exposing what you're really bad at. It's as long as you can talk about how you are good at something and how when you're not good at something, what do you try and do to make up for that? So for example, when I talk about my strengths and weaknesses, I talk about I'm very, very good at planning and project management. That's kind of my job now. Very much into planning, but sometimes I plan too much and that's a weakness. So I actually turn my strength into a weakness also. If I overdo my planning, I actually become really inflexible. Okay, so that's a great way of speaking about strengths and weaknesses, is seeing ourselves almost as two sides of the same coin. If I do too much of this thing, it becomes a problem. If I'm too loyal, it's a strength of mine. If I'm too loyal, maybe I don't challenge people enough either. If I'm too detailed, maybe sometimes I struggle to see the bigger picture. Okay, so you can also frame strengths and weaknesses, and it's okay to talk about what you're not very good at and be honest about it, as long as you talk about how you can also try and combat that weakness. So don't be put off by strengths and weaknesses questions. And also scenario-based questions. What would you do if this happened? And sometimes that's just testing you for some of the more challenging parts that a role might bring. So what would you do if a customer came in and was shouting? What would you do if all of the systems went down? Okay, so those questions are very much about how you might cope in a situation. With all of these questions, I'd advise you taking a moment, taking a sip of your water, pausing, and then planning your answer. And they don't expect you to answer instantly. It's okay to ask for a moment. Do you mind if I just plan my answer quickly? Make a couple of notes, think about what you'd like to say, and then you can launch into your answer. And then analysis questions. Would you like to analyze what's going on here? Tell us what you think. What would you do here? So analysis questions usually are more kind of data-driven roles or roles where you'll really need to make quick decisions or quick judgments on something. And also you might be asked to do an activity. So I don't know if anyone's ever been to an interview and they've been asked to do a task or a desk-based activity. Sometimes they can be a working interview where you actually are invited to come into an office and learn a little bit more. And I've put a link in the slides there. A desk-based assessment, which is where you're given a number of different tasks, often too many for you to complete. And you're supposed to just take a quick look at everything, prioritize them, do the most important one first, and try and work your way through as much as you can to get a desk-based task done. And that just shows your ability to prioritize if you can do basic parts of the role. So that kind of common desk-based assessments are proofreading something or writing an email. When I worked in a school, I was asked to write an email to an angry parent. So that kind of thing is just testing some of your skills for the role. And then also presentations, which usually they will give you plenty of time in advance to prepare. That's a whole other topic of conversation, so I'm not going to delve too much into presentations, but if it's something anybody would like to talk about, I'm more than happy to come in and share my knowledge on those with you. And then also group exercises. This is where you'll be given a task as a whole group of people, and really group exercises are looking about the way you interact and communicate with others. They can often be given you a question where there's no real answer, or given a common one is like a desert island. You're stranded on a desert island. What items do you take? Those kind of questions. And it's all about the way you interact with others, listen, and are respectful. So bear that in mind if you're asked to do a group exercise as well. What I would advise, this is a really great method for you to be aware of, is using the STAR technique. So that is a way of answering questions. I'm not going to go into it too much because there's loads online, so you can Google this and there's loads of great advice on there. But basically, you kind of answer your question in a set model. And that is you talk about the situation, so the job you were in, the task or the thing that was causing a problem. Then you talk about what actions you took, and then you talk about results. And sometimes this model also people talk about relationships as well. So which relationships did you need to make sure, which people did you need to speak to in order to make it happen? So if I was asked a question about, tell us about a time when you diffused a difficult customer, I'm going to talk about Subway. I'm going to say, well, when I was working at Subway, I used to work, so situation, I used to work in the evening shifts, and that meant serving people as they came out of a nightclub. There's my task, serving people. The actions I took, often people would come in and they'd be very irate because they'd had too much to drink. So I would speak to them in a calm voice. There's my first action. I'd ask them exactly what they wanted. I'd be very clear in outlining exactly what was happening in the store and how we expected appropriate behavior. I was clear about what would happen if they were to misbehave. I would try very much to isolate people who were a problem. And then if it became and it escalated, I would ask people to leave the store. And if they didn't comply, I would actually speak to a manager. And if it got really serious, then I would call the police. So they're the list of actions that I'm taking. The results were actually, I was so good at diffusing the situation, I never had to call the police the whole 3 years that I worked in my role in Subway. So I've talked about situation, task, action, result, and I did mention relationship. I spoke to my manager if I needed to. Okay, so it's a good example of how you can work through that. It's a nice way of making your question make sense. It's concise and it's short, and it stops you, if you're like me and you like to waffle on a little bit, it gives you a really nice answer. And if you are a waffler, a good tip here is to just summarize. So in summary, the situation was I worked at Subway. The task was serving people who were irritated quite late at night. The things I did were to really diffuse the situation. And the result was I never actually had any trouble the whole time I worked there. It's a nice way of sounding like you know what you're talking about when really there's loads of information that's flying through your head. And this is something that takes practice. And again, I'd really encourage you to get your friends and family to give you a little bit of interview practice as you go on this kind of thing. Now, just if I go back a slide first, this result part, if there is one thing that I tell you today that you take away, I would love it to be this. Okay, it's really important to talk about the results of what you do. And I'm going to talk about an example of why. So we're going to pretend that you're all Jack. You're Jack. He works in a burger joint and he's got a colleague called Jill. Okay, Jack is brilliant. He serves the customers. He works on the drive-through. He cleans the toilets. He's got brilliant customer rapport and he makes burgers in the background. He's wonderful. Jill does exactly the same as him. She's worked there longer, but she also is really rude to customers. She's not very hygienic. She sniffs and wipes her arm on her sleeve. She's not someone you'd want to work in a burger place with. But if Jack and Jill just list exactly what they do in their job, they're both going to say, I serve burgers, I serve customers, I work on the drive-through, and I do some cleaning and some health and food hygiene. Both of them are going to look like the same person on a CV and in an interview if you just talk about things you did. The difference is in the result. In fact, I would say Jill might look better because she's worked there longer, right? And that's what we don't want. We're looking at people who are great. So what you want to do is try and quantify and talk about the impact you had. So if Jack is interviewing, he might say, well, I worked in the Oxford Street store. So we know it's a big store, loads of burgers. I served over 2,000 customers. Suddenly we'll get a scale of what he's doing. I really take pride in my work and I ensure standards are high. I made sure I got this training in. So he's really trying to show that he's not just doing the basics, but he's going above and beyond. And here's the key bit. You want to talk about the impact you had. So my impact was so good on customers and they were so happy. I received Employee of the Month 5 months out of 24 months that I was there. Okay. I increased sales by 20% by upselling portions and meal deals. Okay. All of those things are better than just listing your responsibilities in a job. So please, please, please think about that when you're giving your answers. Try and think about, why was it successful? What did you do? What was your impact? If you went in and you nursed somebody or you supported them, the impact was they were really happy with the care that they received. Okay. Don't be like Jill, just list the things that you do because it's not making you stand apart from everybody else. Okay. So that's my one thing I'd love to emphasize today and make sure that you leave with. So going back to the kind of questions, I just thought I would give some examples because sometimes it's really hard to know what kind of questions you might be asked. It's very hard to plan for. And you might also find if you know anyone else that works for the organization, you can ask what kind of questions they ask at interview and it'll give you a bit of a help. But here's some examples you might be asked. So tell me about a time when you failed to complete something, but you intended to. Describe a time you demonstrated leadership. Tell us about a time that you had a challenging conversation. Describe a time when you've been innovative. So they're quite open questions. And again, you can use your STAR technique to work through the answers. So I strongly suggest Googling STAR technique. And there's some great websites out there that will show you the kind of really nice model answers as well. Not all job interview questions are easy, right? So there are some tough questions, really difficult questions. Now, I just want to be really clear, there are also illegal questions. So just as a little side note, you should never be asked if you're female or male, if you plan to start to have a family. You should never be asked about kind of your intentions and how long that you might be making any family decisions or what might be in store for you. It's not appropriate for an employer to ask. It's irrelevant for them. So those questions you can shut down. But these are the questions that are a little bit tough to answer. So tough questions are there to challenge you. Okay, so that's okay. So they expect you to be challenged. Take a moment, take a breath, take your trusty pen and paper, and then write down the question. So you know exactly, you can focus on how to answer it and breaking it down. If you're not sure, ask to have the question repeated or clarified. So ask them to repeat it if you're not sure, or if you're still not certain, it's okay to say, I'm really sorry, I'm not quite understanding what you'd like me to answer around. Could you repeat or reframe the question for me? Think about the job you've applied for. So they're answering a question that roughly fits around that. So bear that in mind. And then focus about what you can do. So if they're asking you difficult questions, don't think about the things that you might have struggled to do or things you can't do, but actually turn it into something you can do. So if there's any kind of failure or something you haven't got, so if they talk to you about, tell us about if you use this particular skill and you don't have it, you just say, do you know what, I don't have that. But what I can do is use the time between now and getting the job to learn, or I can enroll myself on a course, or I can teach myself on YouTube. So turn those kind of failures into something positive. And if you ever talk about times when something didn't go well, tell us about a time you failed, tell us about a time when you let someone down, tell us about a time when you needed to show accountability. Turn something where you didn't do great in the past into a positive by saying, do you know what? Now I think back about it, it didn't go so well. But what I have learned is this, this, and this. And in the future, I'll make sure it never happens again by doing this, this, and this. Okay. So it's possible to turn a time when something didn't work into something really good and still showcase that you're a great employee. Also, if you can link it to some kind of achievement and then say, well, actually, here's a great example. When I was here, I went on and I did this. So you can also kind of tie it back to you. And then if you're really struggling to answer a question, it's also okay to say, actually, do you mind if we come back to that question? I'm struggling for an answer right now, but I'd like a little bit more time to think about it. That gives you a bit of time to get a few good questions, get a bit of speed and a bit of confidence up before you can revisit that tougher question as well. So that's how I'd recommend you handle difficult questions. Now, the final bit that I'd like to talk about, I'm very mindful of time and giving everyone plenty of time to kind of talk about this, is to interview the organization. So if you are going to a job interview, you'll go through all of those tough questions, and then there'll be a time towards the end where you'll be likely invited to ask them some questions. And this is a really key part of the day. This is a time to make sure it's the right fit, raise your concerns, and please don't ask about salary or holidays. There is a time for that, but it's not quite yet. But that's the space for you. So far, you've just seen a role on a piece of paper and you've tried to show some interest in it. But actually, now is the time for you to really work out what are the bits I don't understand. What does a day look like? It's not really clear if this role will answer to this person. Will I manage people? So here, when you think about all of that prep we did before, bring your questions, okay? Interviewing them is a really good thing. So sometimes you can ask quite difficult questions to your interviewers, and it shows a lot about you. This is still an opportunity for you to show your skills off by interviewing them. And you can show things like your interest. For example, I love to ask, hi, I would love to talk for you to tell me about what does promotion and progression look like within your organization. And that shows that I'm really keen to grow and develop. So really, I might not be that bothered, but I'm keen to show them that I'm really keen. Okay. I can also ask questions about cultural fit or work-life balance to show that I'm someone who's really mindful about the way I work and who I choose. Okay. So don't underestimate that time at the end. It's still time for you to show off your skills, even if you're asking them questions. Try not to talk about salary and holidays. That's something you can negotiate after an offer. At this point, we're still trying to showcase you in your best light. So I'd recommend just holding it off until a future time if you have got questions. And as I said, this is such a great opportunity to showcase who you are, so make sure you use it. Now, I thought I'd also share with you some example questions. For example, in a remote working role, what do you have in place to make sure I still feel connected? That's a nice one that says, I'm really thinking about my enjoyment in the job. I see from your website that, whatever, I'd love to know more about the organization's trajectory and where you see yourself in the future. So you can kind of learn a bit more about how it might grow and expand and how you could be a part of that. What would a typical day or week look like? I love this question because it really breaks down some of the gaps that you can't really see within a job description. Is it a new position or an existing one? It's quite a useful question to ask. If it's new, sometimes that means that there's nothing. You have to set up processes and everything from scratch. If it's existing, why did that person leave? Were they unhappy? What's going on there? So sometimes, although I don't normally follow up with those questions, you can ask what's the reason for the role becoming vacant? But it's just interesting for you to work out, is there anything going on here that I might want to know about? Don't forget, just because it's a job, and no matter how desperate you are for a job, sometimes it's not the right job and you won't be happy. It's not worth it. Okay, so do bear that in mind. It's a chance for you to really be happy here too. How many people are in the team? What's the structure? What are the chances for progression? That's my favorite. What's the staff culture like? I like that question. And then also asking the interviewer, what's the thing that you love most, or what have you learnt since you've started working in this organization? And then this is my favorite. So here's a bit of a tip. If you don't have any questions, but you are not sure whether they love you, here's a great question to ask. Have you got any reservations about my fit for the role, which I can address right now? And basically what you're doing is giving more time to say, I'm going to convince you that I'm great for this job. Okay, it can work really well. I've actually asked this question before. The reservation they shared was that because I was younger, in my 30s, they thought I would struggle to manage somebody older than me, even though I've got a track record in management. I found that really interesting. And actually what that told me was that if they still think that you have to be older than a person to be able to get the best out of them, it might not be the kind of organization I'd like to work for. And I didn't accept the job. So sometimes the questions we ask can be really helpful or useful as well. Now, a couple of do's or don'ts. I've gone through this content really quickly, so I really welcome questions. If you've got them, put them in the Q&A. We're coming towards the end of the content I've got, but some really good quick fire do's and don'ts that I've got for you now. Don't bring up salary. It makes you look like you just care about the money and not the job. It might be the case, but just don't tell that to the employer, okay? So just bring it up at a later date. Don't talk about changing everything. So if you're in a job interview and you're talking about completely stopping what they're doing and starting something else, it kind of devalues who they are and what they've done so far. So you want to talk about improving, but you don't want to kind of make out like you're changing everything else. Don't talk poorly of previous jobs or previous employers. Don't use jargon if possible. So try not to use any kind of acronyms or words that people might not understand if they work in a different sector. But then when we're talking about do's, do focus on what you can do for the organization. Be honest. It's really important that you're really honest about who you are and what you can do. There's no point in lying because it'll come out later. Be yourself. And then try and turn any negatives into a positive. So if there's something that comes up that you can't do, be honest, but then talk about what you can do. I might not be able to do that, but do you know what I can bring? I can bring this thing. And then answer the question that you'd like to answer. And then finally, please remember, it's about your potential to do the job. They don't expect you to have already been doing it. You don't need to be able to give examples of how you already do that thing. If you were applying for a job you already do, what's the point? So what you need to do is talk about what is your potential to do the job. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you just for a moment to have a look. Here are my top 3 checklists. So I'm just going to mute myself for a moment and let you read through, but here's my kind of distilled. And if you do access the slides, you can print this off and you can make it available so that every time you have a job, you can work your way through the list. Okay, so what I did want to say is just that our career support program, if you do need any more support, speak to the team at Peabody. They're amazing. But if you do want any more help or you want to get in touch, I've put my email address here at the bottom. So you're very welcome to get in touch if you've got questions. But we have, hopefully, I've gone quick enough that we've got time for some Q&A now. So I would welcome any questions from anybody if you've got some. I can see there are some in the Q&A.
Thanks, Emily. That was a really, really thorough and amazing presentation filled with lots of
Lots of really, really good tips. As it was so thorough, there was a couple of people in the background taking out the questions that you covered as you did. So hopefully these ones that are left in the box haven't been answered so far. I'm going to go from the top. So if I'm taking a career break due to health reasons or other important reasons, is it okay to explain and talk about this during an interview?
Absolutely. So if you've got kind of gaps in your CV, what they really mean is a gap in you being in paid employment, but there's loads you've been doing in the interim. So if you have been parenting or on parental leave, if you've been caring, there's still a load of skills that come from that time. It's absolutely fine to just acknowledge this is what you were doing. You don't have to go into huge amounts of detail around what exactly you did in that time, unless it's really relevant. So it could be if you're caring and you're managing someone's medication, and that's quite a big thing for you, and you have to be really organized. Maybe you will use that as evidence of being organized, but don't shy away from life being way more important. And I know it sounds really easy to say, but your life is way more important. A job is a job. You are a whole human being, and all of us at some point have things that happen. So absolutely don't shy away from putting, October 2009 to December 2010, parental leave, career break, going traveling. There's a lot of value in there. So just own it. Don't be shy about it. So for example, a couple of years ago, my dad died and I took some time off to nurse him. And a few of the jobs I'd had, I actually left because I worked abroad. So I put in my CV reason for leaving, to relocate to care for my dad. And my next role was I left because he then was diagnosed as having a terminal illness and I wanted to not work as much. I just put it in there for them to see. And that looked better than having just random roles that looked like they didn't fit very well. It kind of explained why I made a few quick career changes in a short space of time. So it's totally okay. Don't feel like you have to go into too much detail and justify. You're not justifying, you're just saying this is what I was doing at the time.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Next question. Would you recommend having a mock interview first to help you prep? And do you offer this service?
Oh, yes, we do. Yeah, I really would, because I think the SMART technique is a skill and the tell me about yourself question is a skill. I did not start off doing webinars like this. I was stuttering, I was getting confused, I was going backwards and forwards. And this comes from just practice, 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 practice. And that's the only way to get good. Is you're so bored by interviews that they stop being so stressful and they just become another thing that you do. So absolutely. Generation can arrange that. So again, get in touch with Nicola and the team. You're more than welcome to come to us and we can arrange mock interviews.
Thank you. That's good to know. Which is the best way to prepare for a job interview?
Oh, I mean, I don't know if it's the best way. I would probably spend a couple of hours doing my research, making notes, getting a big list of things I think they're likely to ask me, like I showed you from the job description. I would then think about, okay, what are the likely questions? They'll be around these topics. And if I get asked a question that's about dealing with customers, I'm going to use that example. So I kind of mapped out, I kind of guessed some of the questions, and I would spend quite a lot of time on that part of the process. And then I would always make sure I've got an hour before the interview itself to just get my mind together. At that point, you shouldn't be doing any more cramming or learning or practicing. You should just be relaxing as much as you can, taking a bit of time just to try and feel like you're sat in the right place, you've got internet, you're ready, or you're at a coffee shop around the corner, just being kind of calm. So for me, it's all about the prep, those first two stages. Do your research, get your logistics right so that there are no surprises. If you turn up and they say, we'd love to see your presentation, and you didn't know you had to do one, you're not going to get that job purely for the sheer shock. That's going to be really hard to recover from. So I think it's all about good prep.
Yeah, okay. I should probably ask this with the last question too. What are your 5 top tips? I mean, you've just given us 3 there, so maybe we'll let you off unless you can think of 2 more to tag on the bottom of that.
I mean, the results piece, always talk about what's the result. Always, like the one thing, do it in your cover letter, do it in an interview, constantly say, because you could have dealt with a customer and the result was it didn't work very well, but we redid our policy. And so actually we knew that in the future people would be able to deal with customers. Like, what's the result? What have you done? Why are you great? And that gives you a chance to say, this is what I did. And that feels much nicer and much more, it's good for you to boast that way. And like I say, in that kind of Jack and Jill example, that will make you stand out about other people.
Okay, thank you. It's good advice. What is the best way to keep track of what you did or the outcome while in work to use during an interview?
Oh, great question. That's a really good question. I would say keep your CV as up to date as you can. So whenever you're taking on new projects, you think, oh, actually, do you know what? That should probably go on my CV, because you never know when you'll need your CV and you don't want it to be wildly out of date. Another tip that I haven't covered today, but on your CV, I would always put responsibilities as one thing, but then key achievements. So that results bit. Don't just what did the job ask you to do? In McDonald's, serve burgers, serve customers. Oh, I served this many customers. I got this many awards. Okay. So if you're really trying to keep on touch with your real key achievements, put a section in your CV and make sure you kind of got some space dedicated to all the great stuff that you do.
Thank you. What do you do if you are asked a discriminatory question?
Yeah. So I think the first step is actually knowing what is a discriminatory question. That's the first part that's a challenge, is kind of knowing what you can and can't be asked about. So that's a good thing to go and kind of research and know, especially there's quite a lot there around kind of childcare and starting a family and age. Also, like, no employer really needs to know your age. Often the forms will kind of be for their own equality and diversity purposes, but broadly that should be irrelevant. It should be about your skills. So knowing what you can and can't be asked about is key. And then the second thing is to say, I don't feel comfortable answering that question, or I'd love to hear how you think that's relevant to the role. To kind of turn it back to them to kind of say, why are you asking me this question? But broadly, it's a flag for me. So if somebody asks you that, do you want to work there? And maybe you do, but maybe that's a conversation that you need to have. But if you shouldn't be answering it, don't answer it. Just say, I'm going to politely say that I haven't got an answer to that question, and move on, and hope that they understand and respect your space and your time, and that you understand that you can't be asked that question.
Fair enough. We've got a couple of questions that have sneaked into the chat box, but I'm just going to pick them out of there. Please, this is from Sophia. Please, could you explain how best to answer this question, which is, what is your best achievement? I think I'd struggle with that too, because it's just like, what you go, sorry, you're the one who knows.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great, I mean, I don't know if I do know. I think always remember, what is the end job that you're applying for? So if you might have, like, what's my greatest achievement? I used to work abroad in a very different country with a very different language, and my greatest achievement was not leaving straight away when I wanted to. Is that relevant to my job? No. So every question is the question at face value, but then there's also, what are they really asking? And actually, what's the thing I most want to boast that's relevant to this job? That's what that question should be. What's the thing that I'm most proud of that's kind of relevant to this? And it could be around having a family, it could be overcoming adversity, but try and link it through to, and that's why, my dad was really ill. I gave up work for a really long time. I looked after him. I was there to the end. But you know what? I'm really proud. My greatest achievement is following my family. And the reason I think that's going to make me great at this job is because it proves to you, when I'm really dedicated to do something, I'm going to do it. So whatever it is, don't just stop at your greatest achievement, but make it relevant to the role that you're applying for. And hopefully then your employer will be like, oh, okay, really impressive.
I think it is. Another one, I struggle to talk about my weaknesses and using the STAR technique. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly find a really good slide that I have on this. Yes, I do. It's that speaking about yourself as good and bad simultaneously. So we call it two sides of a coin. And basically, the reason I think this is brilliant is because it reflects that you are good and bad at the same time. So when you're asked about a weakness, you end up talking about a strength. And I think that can be really strong. So I'm just going to find, so basically, let's see if I've got any images on it, but basically you are like a coin. So you're both on one side and the other. You can't be one thing and the other. So as I said earlier, I can be really detailed. But if I'm too detailed, if it's an overdone strength, I then become really inflexible because I've planned all of my time to the point that I just can't do anything else. Another good example is if I'm too loyal. Loyal's a great skill, but at the same time, if I'm too loyal, I don't tell people, actually, you're wrong. You're not right about that. Okay. There are loads of other good examples of that one, but if you can think about how to talk about your weaknesses as a strength overdone, that suddenly becomes a really great way of you not talking about your weaknesses, but you're actually emphasizing your strengths as well, if that makes sense. So you kind of say, here's do you know what? You're talking about my weakness. Well, I'm really detailed, which is great, but actually it becomes a problem when I do this. So it becomes a bit of a problem. And then here's what I do to make sure I don't become that thing. So whenever we talk about weaknesses, always counteract it with, I know that I become inflexible, so I make sure that I write time in my diary. I know that I might be too loyal, so I make sure that I put time in to really think and challenge people if I don't think they've been right. And I practice that because it's hard to do. So you just kind of counteract whatever weakness you've got and say, I know I've got it. I know I struggle to get up in the mornings, so I set 5 alarms. And it's okay. Employers just want it. We're all rubbish at something. They just want to know that you know it and that you're aware.
Okay, thank you, Emily. We have another question from Louisa in the box. How can I explain if I left university for 5 years and then I went back to finish it?
I would explain that as resilience and drive. I would just say at the time it wasn't right. I walked away for a little while, but I was determined to come back and make sure that I followed my passion. So there's lots of ways of spinning something that feels, I think sometimes it's deep rooted in our personal feelings of sometimes like shame or failure. So a good one for me, I got a 2.2 in my degree. I was predicted higher than that. And I've always been a bit embarrassed, but actually, if you just turn around and say, I had other things going on at the time. I had other things that I was focusing on. At the same time, I was running a voluntary organization and I just dedicated more time to that. And you know what? You can't do both things. So sometimes that kind of is letting go of that and just thinking about what does it show about you? You're resilient. If you left, fine. You just know when something isn't working and you know when to walk away. So just be a bit proud of your decisions. Think about what your reasons were at the time and just make it really clear to people and be kind of stand by your decisions and be proud of them too.
Okay, we have some attendee who's put their hand up. Yusuf, if you do have a question, please pop it into either the chat or the Q&A. We can take one more before we wrap up. While you're contemplating that, is there anything you'd like to say as a final message, Emily?
But just sometimes bear in mind that the interview process is just as stressful for the people sat opposite you. They are using a 40-minute window to try and find everything out they can about you. So they also sometimes get it wrong. Sometimes they put wrong stuff on the job description. So it's about just being human. They're not expecting a robot with robot answers. They're expecting a real person. And as long as you can say, even if you mess up an answer, you say, Jim, do you know what? I've messed up. Do you mind if I start again? Do you know what? I made some notes. I brought my pen. Is that okay? It's okay just to say, I'm really sorry. I haven't got an answer for that question. Here's what I think that I could do. It's okay. You're human. Okay. And they really respect that. We really, as a hiring manager, I love to hear real people. So there's value in that too. And don't forget.
Okay. We're going to put you on the spot now, Emily. A little question sneaked in via the back somehow. What would your colleagues say about you?
Oh, well, do you know what? I've just had a review because I've been at Generation for 6 months now. So I know what they say about me. They say I bring a lot of energy. They say that I'm very organized. I like a spreadsheet. And they would also probably say that I never stop trying to help people. So often people we have funding to work in London and we have funding to work in Leeds. I never turn anyone away because I want everyone to have a good job. And I just think this process of getting a job is so stressful. It's awful. It's really stressful when you need work and I've been unemployed so many times in my career that actually I just want to help everybody. So I think probably I don't know when to say no is what they would also say about me.
I'm a bit like that too, but yeah, all those qualities they've really come across in your presentation today. I've really enjoyed listening to it, and I'm sure everyone who's logged in has as well. So that just leaves me to thank you, Emily, and thank you all for joining us today. We have, I think, 2 more sessions left this afternoon for anyone who's interested in joining those, and then 10 more tomorrow. So please do log in if you can. All the slides and all the slides will be on the website, and all the reruns will be on our YouTube channel, as I mentioned earlier. Thanks everybody, and thank you again, Emily. Take care.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye.